Hi guys, and welcome to every episode of Family Guy Season 8 Reviewed. We are back to normal length this time, after all the shenanigans with the Writers Guild of America strike, which shortened the previous two seasons. My hope is that somehow allows the show to get back on track after a rather mediocre Season 7. Now, I'm not sure that will happen, as the issues pointed out last time of padded out episodes and spiteful characters seem to be getting worse and worse by the episode. But hey, this season could prove me wrong. I do recognise a few of the episodes from it, and some of them I know from experience are good, so I know for a fact it won't be all bad at least. Also, it's worth noting that the Cleveland show started up during this time, so sadly we have lost him on Family Guy for the time being. Now, they do make some references to that show, and Cleveland does appear now and again for a cameo, and in one episode a big role, so that's something. But he will be a bit of a miss. Anyway, before we start, if you would be so kind as to like the video and subscribe to the channel, I would very much appreciate the support. That's all the formalities done, so let's get cracking. Season 8, Episode 1, Road to the Multiverse. Stewie shows Brian his remote control that allows the user to travel between parallel universes, so the two decide to go on an adventure through them. My best cutaway was the dog version of the news with Tom Tucker, and my best moment overall was the Disney universe. The season opener gets a 5 out of 5. Having Brian and Stewie take a tour through the endless multiverses through Stewie's new device is a simple thing to think of once Stewie already has the tech, which we know he does, but executing it well is not as simple. Basically, a premise like this is going to live and die by how interesting and entertaining the different universes are, and with a few exceptions, they are all pretty interesting here. I especially enjoyed the short cameos, like the faraway guy who yells compliments, as well as the misleading caricatures which come right after it. The Japanese Griffin family also comes to mind, as does the real life version of Brian and Stewie. My favourite thing here though has to be the whole Disney section. They really nail the vibe of Disney down to a T. And no, I'm not talking about the Jew-hating stereotype, I'm talking about the animation, which is very well done in Disney style of course. Even the Pie song is quite catchy, and does somewhat sound like a Disney song. The conflict towards the end of the episode revolved around the device breaking, and Stewie and Brian being unable to get home. That is kind of a standard thing for this type of story, but the dog universe threw up some good moments at least, like the dog version of Tom Tucker on the news, saying "that's my bush." Even the dog version of Stewie saving the day worked well enough. This is just an entertaining watch. Not the deepest episode, but one of the more creative ones. Season 8, Episode 2, Family Guy. Lois discovers that her family has Jewish heritage. Peter soon gets overly invested in his family's newfound faith. My best cutaway here was Quagmire thinking he was getting the spin-off. And my best moment was Peter with the Cathy Island cardboard cutout. This one gets a 2 out of 5. This felt like a lot of the episodes from last season, where the characters' actions all felt a bit forced, and the message that religion sucks and only creates problems was very in your face. The revelation that Babs is actually Jewish was a bit out of the blue, but Lois didn't seem to care anyway. Her only motivation for adopting the religion is because Peter started to push Catholicism. And why was Peter being a Catholic all of a sudden? Well, because the ghost of his dad visited him. Why Peter would even listen to the ghost of Francis is anyone's guess, considering that he didn't even listen to him in life. As you can imagine, this makes the whole conflict of the episode feel super forced. And as mentioned, the final parting shot to religion at the end just had to be snuck in. The best bits here were Peter with the cardboard cutout at the start. It was silly of course, but suited him well I thought. Quagmire thinking he was the one getting the spin-off show was also an okay gag. Still an underwhelming episode overall though. Season 8, Episode 3, Spies Reminiscent of Us. Brian and Stewie get drawn into a plot involving governments and Russian spies. So the Russian cutaway gag was my best cutaway here, full stop, and my best moment overall was Meg speaking Russian at the end. This one gets a 2 out of 5. It feels maybe a little harsh to give this a 2 because there was nothing major wrong with it. It was just one of those times where, as I was watching, I couldn't really get that invested into what was going on. Peter messing around in Cleveland's old house at the start was okay, but once he got into the comedy with Quagmire and Joe, the comedy ironically left the building. There was no payoff to that storyline either. The Russian Cold War spy thing was a bit weird, but I guess it added some stakes. It was interesting that Mayor West was the guy all along. However, even that felt a bit underwhelming, especially as a lot of the time spent in Russia was boring and didn't make use of the setting. Vladimir Putin setting up the boring Russian cutaway was the only moment I liked from that section. As I mentioned though, the ending scene was a nice touch. Having Meg also being triggered into action as a Russian spy, Mila Kunis does actually speak Russian, so it is nice for her to get a chance to show it off in the show, if only for a few seconds. This is a mild 2 for sure, but I simply didn't enjoy it enough for it to be a 3. Season 8, Episode 4, Brian's got a brand new bag. Brian starts dating an older woman named Rita. However, after inviting her over for dinner, the family start to ridicule her age. My best cutaway here was the white track stars, and my best moment was Peter and his Roadhouse kicking. The score for this one is 2 out of 5. This started out okay, with Peter renting the Roadhouse movie and going on a rampage around town. The Charlie Brown scene was my favourite bit. Brutal as her beatdown was, it's hard to feel much sympathy for Lucy Van Pelt. There were a few more okay moments worthy of a grin. Brian's cameo in Die Hard worked just because of how out of place he looked in it, and the white track stars having no chance against the black ones only worked because of the "I thought they were coming after us" line. That's about all the positives I can come up for this one. Let's get into the rather annoying story. I actually liked how Brian and Rita were getting along at the start. It did seem natural, and the fact that she was an older woman added an extra dimension to it. However, as is often the case with Family Guy, a happy story with likeable characters was absolutely not on the table. The whole family give Brian grief over the age gap, which is pretty weird anyway, given that he's a dog, but oh well. The scene at dinner is a bit much. Sure, Peter finding new ways to try and discover her age was okay, but it's just a pain to sit through the whole family being such jerks. It got to the point where I wanted Brian to tell them all to do one, and say that as long as he is happy, nothing else matters. He kind of did that, but he did not go hard enough, in my opinion. But still, the way things were set up, we had a chance of a nice ending, where Brian stood by Rita, and maybe even the family came around to her. Did that happen? Well, I think you already know the answer to that. Rita out of nowhere started acting like an 80-year-old, never mind a 50-year-old. So Brian got sick of it and cheated on her. He tried to justify it to her, but she wasn't having any of it and they split up. That didn't work for me on any level. Rita's sudden descent into being a full-on grandma was so forced, and Brian, who I was rooting for earlier in the episode, screws it all up by cheating on her and trying to paper over it like it was nothing, and like he was still the good guy. So basically, in the end, I was left with no one to root for, and a very bad taste in the mouth. Oh well, maybe next time we can have a Brian dating story without everyone being an asshole. Season 8, Episode 5, Hannah Banana. Stewie meets Hannah Montana, who turns out to be a robot, which goes on a rampage through town. Meanwhile, Chris proves that the evil monkey in his closet actually exists. My best cutaway was the mentally challenged suicide bomber, and my best moment overall was Peter and Quagmire using the guns on the plane. This one gets a rating of 4 out of 5. I was thinking about the quality of this as I was watching the episode, and it was seeming like an average okay episode to me. that was probably going to head to a 3 rating, but the third act was just plain fun, no pun intended. To go back to the earlier stuff first though, it was a good worthwhile thing to uncover the truth about the evil monkey in Chris's closet. The revelation that he was not actually evil and wanted to help Chris was a surprisingly wholesome one, although the fighting between Peter and Chris was not the best. The subplot with Stewie being this massive Hannah Montana fan was meh at first, with some mild bits of satire about how Disney keeps churning out these child stars, but once we found out that Miley Cyrus was actually a robot that went mad once Stewie messed with its circuits, things got much more interesting. The robot going on a rampage through town even managed to intersect with the evil monkey story. The monkey tried to reason with the robot, causing it to get into some bother, which led to Chris getting Quagmire and his biplane to save the day. The showdown was energetic and fun, especially for Peter's laughing and Quagmire's giggities when shooting the minigun. Things wrapped up in a nice way as well, with everyone making up, and the monkey going to live in Jake Tucker's closet. The cutaways were average overall, but the mentally challenged terrorists riding a bicycle into the World Trade Center I did find funny. Season 8, Episode 6, Quagmire's Baby. Quagmire discovers that he is the father of a baby girl after she is left at his doorstep, but he struggles with taking care of her. My best cutaway was Peter's radical penis enlargement, and my best moment was the Flintstones police car chase. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This was definitely average by Family Guy standards. It took 8 minutes to actually get to the main story because Peter was fooling around with this radio thinking he was talking to Ronald Reagan. I wasn't too mad about it though, because there were a few good moments coming from that. The Flintstones' wild police chase was great. The fact that they got the actual narrator to do it was pretty cool. Running from the cops, yabba dabba don't. Fred doing the classic cartoon run, where he runs on the spot for a few seconds and then speeds away, also made me laugh. The Quagmire stuff was fine, but not that memorable. Of course he would be clueless on how to raise a baby. I don't really buy the ending, where he cares so much about her that he has to try and get her back from her adopted family. I mean, Quagmire has seen in previous episodes that he has kids from all over the world, and he hasn't seemed to care. And of course, he just has to end the episode on an incest joke for good measure. As far as the other jokes go, Peter's ridiculous plan for penis enlargement actually working was a gag which worked for me. It's Peter's smug look that sells it. He's right too. He doesn't need it to work again, does he? Season 8, Episode 7. Jerome is the new black. Peter and the guys look for a friend to fill the vacancy left by Cleveland. They settle on a fellow bar patron named Jerome. Meanwhile, Brian finds out that Quagmire hates him. My best cutaway was the London Gentlemen's Club, and my best moment was, indeed, Quagmire's rant to Brian. This one gets a 3 out of 5. Both the A and B plot here try to add something to the character relationships. Peter getting a new friend, Jerome, and Brian finding out Quagmire hates him. Both had some interesting moments, but they both somehow lacked a bit of authenticity to get me to really buy into them. Let's start with Peter. It was probably needed for the gang to add a new friend, and Jerome seems like a cool and likeable enough guy to fit the bill. Some of the joking around from Lois about him being a former boyfriend was funny, but a bit insensitive on her part. I can understand to an extent Peter being annoyed at that, but of course he goes totally overboard with his jealousy and forces Jerome away. Again, I can't say I was that invested in them making back up, but at least they tried to leave things on a somewhat happy note. I could have done without the bit about Meg though. The Quagmire Brian stuff was a bit abrupt. It was never hinted at before this episode that Quagmire hated Brian so much. Still though, the rant he lays down is iconic. And it's very true. That's why it has resonated with people. Fans were already feeling this way towards Brian, so it's nice to see someone point it out to his face, even if Quagmire is a bit of a hypocrite delivering it. Going forward, I guess them hating each other will now be a thing, which does potentially open up some new opportunities for stories between them, so let's hope they make the best of it. As far as the jokes go, Peter messing up Joe's parrot was spiteful yet amusing, and the London Gentlemen's Club was an example of a long drawn out gag working. I think it's how their throat clearing gets progressively more aggressive and intense, which helps sell a gag for me. The one guy sounds like a race car, for Christ's sake. Season 8, Episode 8. Dog Gone. Brian tried to teach people a lesson about the importance of an animal's life. Meanwhile, the Griffins hire Consuela as a cleaner. My best cutaway was Peter on a swing, refusing to let Stewie have a go. And best moment overall was Consuela refusing to let Peter and Lois fire her. This one gets a 3 out of 5. So the main thing this episode was trying to do didn't work for me. It was kind of trying to touch on animal rights through the perspective of Brian, which is an interesting idea. Him coming to terms with people valuing him less than humans because he's a dog had some potential. However, the whole thing did kick off because he ran over a dog in the most gruesome way possible and tried to cover it up. So it's already off to a bad start. But where this really fumbles the ball is when they try and hit us with this emotional ending. You see, Brian is quite understandably thinking of himself as worthless after everyone laughs off his campaign, and at one point the town, including Peter and Lois, even chase after him trying to eat him. Yet the next moment, when the family think he is dead, they are distraught, and suddenly he means the world to them. I just don't buy it, I'm sorry. You know, I usually forgive the characters acting like assholes, especially if it's funny, but this is the price you pay for it. You essentially give up any chance of telling a story with heart. Still, when this episode fails in the story department, it mostly makes up for with the jokes. The Consuela scenes were good. I love how she responds to everyone in such a casual yet assertive manner, like refusing to leave because it's raining outside, or not giving up her cleaning job. My favourite lines from her was, "No, I keep job," and "you fat keep you warm," to Chris. When you add in some decent cutaways, like Peter hurting himself on a swing, you have a episode which still cracks decent territory. Season 8, Episode 9, Business Guy. After Carter suffers a heart attack and slips into a coma, Peter takes over the running of Pudishment Industries. My best cutaway was the German bedtime story, and my best moment was the African American heart monitor. This one gets another 3 out of 5. Peter and his friends try to show Carter a good time, only for him to have a heart attack and go into a coma. Him leaving the business to Lois is to be expected, although he was technically still alive, so who was he expecting to run the business? Well, not Peter, I'm sure. Yeah, Peter almost bankrupts the business with his own brand of nonsense. None of it made much sense, and it was kind of annoying to watch Peter be so aggressively selfish. The incompetence we expect, but it's nice if he's a bit funny with it. The only thing which made it bearable was that Carter was the one who was on the end of it. He has treated Peter like crap forever, so him getting a bit of payback was cathartic. Things went back to normal in the end, of course, but not before a Scooby-Doo style chase, and Peter getting stuck in mid-air. I did like that ending gag of Peter being stuck in that jump, by the way. In terms of the good moments, outside of that, the German bedtime story was very straightforward and on the nose, but without a doubt, the best thing in the episode was the African American heart monitor. The "oh he dead" and "he's alright" were just classics, as was the "ghost dad" from the Bill Cosby heart monitor, as Carter was having another heart attack. Season 8, Episode 10, Big Man on Hippocampus. Peter develops amnesia, causing him to drift apart from Lois and his family. My best cutaway was the fat guy ordering dessert being inevitable. And my best part of the episode was the family on Family Feud. This one gets a 4 out of 5. This is getting a slightly generous 4 based on the numerous funny scenes and gags in the episode. The intro Family Feud scenes are gold. You have Lois with her creepy kissing of the host, Peter's pure incompetence costing them the win, and Stewie giving his own unique answers, along with Lois. That was the best of them all. Say what you want about him, but I think his answers were more creative, to be honest. The main plot was amnesia related, which even the episode acknowledges is incredibly unoriginal. They don't do much exciting with it either. Peter ends up foregoing Lois and his family, only to remember them in the end and go back to them. But not before Quagmire tried to sleep with her, of course. Coming a few episodes off his rant to Brian, he is certainly being quite the hypocrite, isn't he? To go with the Family Feud stuff from earlier, this episode comes complete with a funny set of cutaways. Dwayne Johnson simulating the Peter and Lois sex scene with the dolls is great. It's just impressive they got him to do it. Peter's cave, which he takes such pride in, I also enjoyed. But the relatability of the guy ordering dessert when everyone wants to leave takes the cake for me, pun intended. Season 8, Episode 11, Dial Meg for Murder. Meg goes to jail for hiding her convict boyfriend. When she comes out, she has transformed into a hardened criminal herself. My best cutaway here was Chinese NASCAR. And I think for the first time I've actually got two best moments because I couldn't choose between them. Those are Meg beating up Peter and the fly that wants to leave but can't figure it out. This episode gets a 4 out of 5. So Act 1 of this, when Meg is dating her criminal boyfriend, is just okay. But once she gets out of prison, that's when the fun starts. The scene where she first gets home and threatens everyone and beats Peter up has turned out to be a pretty iconic Family Guy moment. Not only cathartic for all the times Peter has hurt Meg, but his smugness making him unable to resist, claiming to be the best at everything, which only results in Meg beating him more, works so well. Chris is right, he should have some humility. Things do become a bit samey after that initial scene. Meg beats up Connie and holds Brian at gunpoint, trying to rob Mort's store. It's fine, but obviously doesn't have as much impact. The second and third time around, the ending was also very predictable. It kind of makes you sad how Meg is gonna give up her new assertive personality, which of course will lead to her going back to that pattern of abuse again. If only she could stand up for herself without having to act like a sociopathic criminal. I will at least give the ending credit for linking back into Brian's writing about Meg from earlier. It was a genuinely nice thing he wrote about Meg. In terms of the jokes, the Chinese NASCAR got a laugh out of me, and the fly not being able to leave, I think may be a contender for my favourite gag on the show. It's not only one of the most relatable things I've ever seen, the voice of the fly fits the scene so well, and the things it says are just perfect. Between that and Meg beating up Peter, this has to get at least a 4. Season 8, Episode 12, Extra Large Medium. Stewie helps Chris prepare for a date with a girl who has Down syndrome. Meanwhile, Peter believes he has psychic powers. My best cutaway for this one was taken for a ride like a snail on the back of a turtle, and my favourite thing about this episode was just Chris and Stewie hanging out together. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. As mentioned, the main plot here worked mostly because I enjoyed the interactions between Chris and Stewie, with their conversations while trapped in the forest, into how Stewie helps Chris prepare for his date. The Down Syndrome Girls song was perhaps a little too long. It was very indulgent, but it was still sung very well, as you would expect from Seth. The conclusion to it all, with the girl being a bitch, was a bit unexpected, and the ending message seemed a bit pointless. People with Down syndrome can be assholes too. Yeah, I think most people could understand that concept. Just because you have some kind of disability, it doesn't automatically make you a great person, of course. Although in fairness to the episode, it is kind of rare for people with disabilities to be depicted in media in this way, so I guess I can kind of give it a pass. The subplot of psychics was exactly the kind of stuff you would expect. The usual stuff, mocking them, etc. Not that creative. Peter having fun faking it at the end was a little entertaining, although it did cost the guy his life by being blown up. Of course it did. As far as the cutaways, I enjoyed the confident Italian in theoretical situations, and especially the snail and the turtle. I mean, who can blame the snail? That turtle was an absolute maniac, risking his life like that. Season 8, Episode 13. Go Stewie Go! Stewie cross-dresses in order to star in the American version of Jolly Farm. Meanwhile, Meg gets a boyfriend who ends up cheating on her with Lois. My best cutaway was James Earl Jones and his live-action audition for Darth Vader. And that's also my best moment full stop in the episode. This one gets a 1 out of 5. This is one of those all too frequent Family Guy episodes where everything the characters do is so aggressively mean and selfish that it leaves you feeling a bit empty. Both plotlines are rooted in deception. Stewie is dressing up as a girl in order to get on Jolly Farm and keeps lying to Jessica about his gender. Not that it matters in the end, as Stewie is kicked off the show and never sees her again. The subplot of Meg actually getting a normal boyfriend for a change, that part was nice to see. But when you have Lois make out with him, everything of course goes to hell. Lois is irredeemable after that, frankly, and her talk with Meg does nothing to help. Essentially, the episode ends with them still hating each other. Peter was of course unlikable as well, trying to point out that Lois was aging to make her feel bad about herself. Don't worry though, the two make up in the end, forgetting completely about Lois cheating on him and Peter treating her like crap. Seems like a functional relationship to me. I never found the comedy here funny. The one and only exception was James Earl Jones trying to get the part of Darth Vader. The way he turns up in the Darth Vader suit, with all his flab sticking out everywhere. We just want you to do the voice. I mean, as insensitive as that is to say, you can't really blame them, can you? Season 8, Episode 14, Peter Asmund. Peter becomes the victim of sexual harassment from his boss, Angela. My best cutaway here was an American finding his brother in China. And my best moment was Quagmire's greeting to Angela. This one gets the second 1 out of 5 in a row. Not a lot of this worked for me. The intro of Peter bugging people with his camera was a decent Mickey take of some so-called journalists. I wouldn't call it particularly funny though. Once he gets punched by Ollie Williams and stops wearing his glasses, Peter soon finds himself being harassed by Angela, who's suddenly attracted to him for some reason. It's just not pleasant viewing, is it, to watch a character abuse another like this, using their own employee's job as leverage. The episode even tries to make us feel sorry for Angela at one point. Look, I understand, it can be tough if you are lonely and struggling in your life, but you're not going to get any sympathy from me if you're out there causing harm to others. That's just not the best way to respond to adversity in life in general. You also have Lois offering absolutely no support to Peter whatsoever and treating it like a joke. She seems to think that a woman can sexually abuse a man, which is clearly incorrect because we see an example of just how it can happen in this very episode, right? Now, whether a man sexually abusing a woman is any different than the other way around is potentially a debate. There are nuances to that argument, I think. I think to some extent it does depend on the circumstances. But that isn't what Lois is saying anyway. She's flat out saying that a woman can sexually abuse a man in any way, under any circumstances, which is obviously just flat out wrong. And even though Peter did get Mort to do the deed of having sex with her in the end, Angela still never got any consequences for her actions. So for that reason alone, the ending misses the mark. The tone of the story also brings down the comedy. I mean, there were only 4 cutaways used, none of them particularly good. The only scene I found genuinely funny was the silly visual of Quagmire in Peter's clothes, and then his casual disrespect to Angela once he is uncovered. I love how casually he delivers the line. Peter neglected to tell me that you're a complete dumpster fire. Still, overall, this episode is a tough scene. Season 8, Episode 15. Brian Griffin's House of Pain. Brian writes a television pilot, but it gets sabotaged by James Woods. Also, Chris and Meg injure Stewie and try to cover it up. My favourite cutaway here was Brian feeling like Adolf Hitler did after he wrote Mein Kampf. My best moment overall was Joe trying to attack Brian after seeing his TV show. This one gets a 2 out of 5. A third bad episode in a row. This one is saved the misfortune of a 1 by 2 moments I liked. One being Peter's Bigger Jaws TV show, which honestly, given how movies are nowadays, doesn't even seem that silly. The other being Joe's over-the-top reaction to Brian's bad show. A Joe freakout is always fun, it's always a thing to behold, but he really went off on one here, even firing his gun at Brian for good measure. The actual substance of the story was bland though. Brian selling out again is of course nothing new, and the scenes of the sitcom themselves were not particularly engaging. James Woods also felt a bit out of place here, unlike his last appearances. It's almost like he hijacked the episode itself, not just Brian's show. The subplot, well, it was not really a subplot, it was just a gross out comedy of Stewie's head being split open after he got knocked down the stairs by Chris and Meg. Needless to say, it wasn't very good. Also, every member of the family, bar Brian, tried to cover it up at some point. By the time they actually got him to the hospital, I'm sorry, the damage is already done. His brain is literally showing and being eaten by raccoons, for God's sake. I'm not sure he could be saved at that point. But hey, it's a cartoon, so who cares, right? Well, I care, because I wasted my time with a mediocre episode, so there. Season 8, Episode 16, April in Quahog. After it's announced that the apocalypse is coming in 24 hours, Peter admits that he hates spending time with his kids. However, the apocalypse was a hoax, and the kids are not impressed with Peter. My best cutaway was the old guy reliving his youthful shenanigans, and my best moment was Peter on crystal meth. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. The first 2/3 of this was mostly filler until we got into the main portion of the story. Peter in Jory was fine, mainly for him bringing back Bird is a Word again. The bit about the news station pranking everyone about the end of the world may have been totally unbelievable in the era of the internet and whatnot, but it was still probably the best part of the episode. They got in a lot of snappy Family Guy style jokes, like Quagmire tricking Joe into letting him sleep with Bonnie. I also liked Peter getting a lion, just because of him saying, "Of course it bites, it's a lion." I found that blunt response so funny for some reason. Peter saying he hates spending time with his kids is actually quite mild compared to what he said to them and done to them in the past. So for it to get such a big reaction here was a bit strange. All is forgiven in the end when he buys them an Xbox anyway, so it's fair to say that nothing of importance came from the character side of things. Again though, the jokes were decent. Peter on meth worked, mainly because of the scene where he shoots out through Stewie's roof while on it. The old guy sharing his gay shenanigans with his rather disappointed grandson I also found funny. The resigned, "Yeah, it was pretty gay," at the end is what sells it for me. Season 8, Episode 17, Brian and Stewie. Brian and Stewie get trapped in a bank vault for the night, and there was not a single cutaway in this episode, so I obviously never had a best one. But I can pick out a best moment, which was the final conversation Stewie and Brian have with each other. This one gets a 2 out of 5. This is quite a divisive episode among the Family Guy fanbase. Some people really like it, and some hate it. As you can guess by the rating, I am more on the dislike side. Don't get me wrong, the idea to change up the format for the 150th episode was fine. Having a episode focused only on Brian and Stewie, with no cutaways, was a bold thing to try, However, I just found it to be too boring to really get behind. When you get right down to it, hardly anything actually happened here. Most of the time was spent on gross out moments, like Brian eating Stewie's poo and sick, or piercing his ear in the most gruesome way possible. Sure, the scenes where Brian opens up a bit do make sense for him. I do sense that Brian would be the type to feel his life lacks meaning, so him telling all of this to Stewie showed some trust on his part. Now, Family Guy is not really a show which is capable of making you feel too emotional about the characters. They're all such bad people most of the time. It's impossible to take it to heart that much. Still though, I do at least buy that Stewie and Brian genuinely care for each other deep down, and Stewie's awkward way of admitting that he does love Brian, and vice versa, is kind of the perfect way for them to find out how they truly feel about each other. Ultimately though, the majority of this episode was not good and simply not funny. The bottom line is, I'm never going to find a Family Guy episode good if it's not funny, even if the story was executed a lot better than it was here. Season 8, Episode 18, Quagmire's Dad. Quagmire struggles to accept that his dad is gay. When he confronts him about it, his dad says he's actually trans and gets a sex change operation. My best cutaway was Quagmire's in denial about his father, like a family in massive debt. And my best moment was Peter and Lois laughing at Brian after finding out he slept with Ida. This one gets a 3 out of 5. So I would say that this episode is a bit of a piss take. It's certainly not to be taken seriously. Its main goal seems to be to make Quagmire's dad being a transgender person as funny as possible. And while that may not be the greatest starting point, I think it turned out about as well as it could have. I mean, the character stuff was a bit of a mess, of course. Touching on Quagmire briefly, at first he doesn't want to accept his dad is gay, then it's even harder for him to accept that his dad actually sees himself as a woman. To be honest, getting this bombshell dropped on you, out of the blue, I can see being hard to get your head around. In general, the transgender debate always seems to rage on, and in my opinion, there are a lot of nuances to it, but I'd rather not give my thoughts on it right now. At least in the end, Quagmire did say that as long as his dad is happy, that's the most important thing. It's his life after all, not Quagmire's. Brian sleeping with Quagmire's dad after he got the sex change operation was something. They really milked it for all it was worth, with Brian throwing up for a solid 20 seconds once he found out. I must admit, I did like Peter and Lois being unable to contain themselves after finding out. Peter saying it's the best day of his life, and them both being in hysterics after Brian says, "You're just jealous because I found a real woman." As I said, it's a bit of a piss take, but I found it funny. The ending sums up the episode with Quagmire beating the crap out of Brian, but Brian's final line, "I fucked your dad," really put Quagmire in his place. I mean, how do you even respond to that? That is indeed a thing which happened. So yeah, a very chaotic episode really, which somehow does enough to be okay. Season 8, Episode 19, The Splendid Source. Peter, Joe, Quagmire, and later Cleveland go on a quest for the source of all dirty jokes. My best cutaway was the monkey scratch footage at the end, I guess, but there were only 2 of them, so take that with a pinch of salt. My best moment was the Would You Rather. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. At first, this was looking like your typical Family Guy episode, with the weird stuff about Peter crapping his pants every time he heard Quagmire's joke. However, the wild goose chase they go on to find the origin of the joke was very interesting and fun. I liked how they tricked Bonnie and Lois in the car ride by distracting them with talk about childbirth. Wise move, wise move. I guess I should mention that we got Cleveland back for this one, so it was nice to see another adventure involving him. Once the gang eventually tracked down the record place of all the dirty jokes, there was a bit of chatting which turned into a dramatic escape scene. This almost felt like some kind of movie parody at some points, maybe Indiana Jones or something like that. All in all, I definitely appreciated the way the episode was structured because it actually made the story engaging for a change. Even though the concept of dirty jokes was silly to make such a big deal out of, it still succeeded at making you actually care about what was happening. At least for me it did. The jokes here were solid too, like Peter fighting his reflection in the water in front of the Lincoln Memorial. You also have the observational joke of the Obama monument, and of course the would you rather in the car. I always like it when the gang do that. This time it was the Hispanic female doctors who felt their wrath. Season 8, Episode 20, Something 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 Dark Side. The power once again goes out at the Griffin's house, so Peter retells the story of Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. My best cutaway was the Empire's recruiting video, and my best moment was Consuela talking over Darth Vader Stewie while he was on the phone. This one gets a 3 out of 5. So, this was the second hour-long Star Wars special the show has done. I didn't think this was quite as entertaining as the first. There seem to be more padded out sections, which is especially noticeable when the episode has such a long runtime. That said, the characters in their Star Wars roles again was nice to see, and the battle between Chris and Stewie at the end was decent. My favourite joke of the whole thing was Consuela talking over Stewie while he was on the phone. I know it's probably just a stereotype of Hispanic female housemaids, but I still found it funny. The main thing I noticed about this episode was it had a very smart-ass kind of tone. The dialogue seemed to love breaking the fourth wall and being as sarcastic as possible. For example, we have Peter saying, "We have 5 main characters on this ship, I think we'll be fine." And oh, we're kissing, so now the scene's gonna change. As well as Meg popping up and complaining about her screen time. There is a lot of little moments like that, and to be honest I kind of enjoyed it. This is not a serious parody after all, so you may as well poke fun as you go, though this was still an average episode overall for me. Season 8, Episode 21, Partial Terms of Endearment. A friend asks Lois to be a surrogate mother and she agrees, but when her friend unexpectedly dies, Lois isn't sure what to do with the baby. My best cutaway was an Italian getting glasses, and my best moment was Peter's different porn scenarios. So the season finale gets a 4 out of 5. This happens to be quite the contentious and controversial episode, so much so that Fox didn't even air the episode at the time. This was due to the focus on abortion in the episode. It did air sooner in the UK, mind you, but for the US, they had to wait for it to be included as part of a DVD. For the most part though, I enjoyed this. I found it fairly funny. The bits of Peter thinking he was going to have a threesome were fun, with his various type of porn-esque situations, like a pizza delivery guy and a school teacher grading papers. I'm not sure what porn he's into though, if Nazis are a part of it. The call to action, if you will, in the story was for Lois to be a surrogate mother for her friends, Dale and Naomi. It was an interesting thing, but of course, being Family Guy, they never took it seriously enough to actually try and analyse the situation deeply. Instead, it was mostly Peter trying to decide for Lois whether to have the baby or not. That trend continued after Dale and Naomi were killed, and after Peter was won over by the pro-life people, which happened quite late in the episode by the way. The whole abortion debate was only the last third of this. How do I think they handled it? Well, good and bad. I liked some part of what was put forth, such as the doctor saying, keep abortions safe, legal and rare. If you are going to have abortion be legal, then that is for sure the way to do it. However, the take on the debate was fairly one-sided. The pro-life protesters and activists were portrayed as either idiots or people who are being purposefully disingenuous with their arguments. It's clear the people behind the show are pro-choice, right? Which is why the episode ended on the random Peter line, "We had the abortion." As a side, I did kind of like how abrupt that line was. For some reason it just worked for me as an ending. It's not like they were ever going to resolve this in some kind of deep satisfying way anyway. Now I'm not going to get into my opinion on abortion here, as frankly it's not relevant to the episode's quality. If you want to ask me in the comments, then I'll happily tell you, but for now, I'll just move on. The main reason this sneaked to 4 was Peter's shenanigans at the start, along with some funny gags, like the Italian reading the lines at the eye doctors, and Peter saying, "I only protect the unborn, once they are out of the vagina they can go fuck themselves." Obviously again, it's kind of a jab at the pro-life people, but a lot of people do seem to act in that way though. This was an eventful way to end the season, to say the least. I probably like it more than most, I suspect. Right, so that's every episode of Family Guy Season 8 done, and here is the season summary. The overall average score for the season is 2.9, which is, for all intents and purposes, the same as last year, 0.3 below, but that's neither near or there. But still technically the worst so far. And that's shown again by the spread of the episodes. It's quite an even spread again. Most of the episodes were 3, but there was only one 5 out of 5, which is a little bit concerning for the future. In terms of my bottom 5 episodes, they were Family Guy at 5, Brian's Got a Brand New Bag at 4, Brian Griffin's House of Pain at 3, Go Stewie Go at 2, and Peter Asmund as the worst of the year. My top 5 episodes were Big Man on Hippocampus at 5, The Splendid Sauce at 4, Hannah Banana at 3, Dial Meg for Murder at 2, and as the only 5 out of 5, Road to the Multiverse was the best. In terms of this season overall, again it was kind of similar to season 7 in terms of quality, which means not good, slightly below average in fact. If anything, characters like Peter and Brian are even more exaggerated here than they were last time. But that's about it in terms of the changes of the characters. There were a number of things here which differed from season 7 though. Firstly, in general, there were not as many cutaways used. I actually found this to be to the season's detriment. I know a lot of people like to complain about Family Guy's cutaways and overuse of them, and I agree you don't want them to be too excessive. However, from my time reviewing the show so far, I find that cutaways, if done well, actually do make an episode funnier, and because Family Guy is a show which relies almost entirely on comedy, if you take the cutaways away, then the episode is often left feeling a little hollow. The story by itself, and the self-contained jokes within, are often not enough to keep me entertained, so I would actually like to see a few more cutaways next season. One more major thing to note about this season is that it changed the animation style from the traditional hand-drawn animation to being purely digital. The change is fairly noticeable too. Much like when The Simpsons went through this change, the visuals are more crisper and slightly more colourful. However, the trade-off is that there seems to be less movement going on. It feels much stiffer overall, and if it's something which ends up encouraging lazy animation, then I'm not sure it's a good thing. I guess I'll have to monitor it as we go. So that kind of sums up this season for me, guys. It seems the show is settling in around this level now, which is not very encouraging for the future, but hey, I will be there to review it regardless. As ever, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed, and feel free to leave your thoughts on this season in the comments.